Okay, so get ready because we're going deep on this one.
Deep.
It's a story that'll make you think twice about workplace justice and how it all actually plays out.
Yeah.
We're talking legal battles,
Yeah.
accusations of shady dealings,
Mm-hmm.
and one man who just wouldn't give up.
Right.
Imagine this. You're suddenly retrenched, right? But something's just off about the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what happened to a group of state police officers back in 2014
Oh, wow.
and their journey through the legal system.
Yeah.
It's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. I think what's particularly interesting about this case is it reveals potential cracks in the very institutions that are designed to protect workers' rights. You know, the Ministry of Labor
Exactly.
and the State Police Association, also known as the EPA,
Yeah.
which acted as the officers' union.
You would think your union
Yeah.
would be like the ultimate advocate.
Absolutely.
But as we're going to see, things get a little messy.
Yeah.
Our main source for this deep dive is a report by Victor Sandy.
Okay.
He was one of the retrenched officers.
Yeah.
And he took it upon himself to document everything meticulously. Like he became an investigator almost
Wow.
for his colleagues.
That's dedication.
Yeah.
And I think what's really valuable about his account is it not only highlights the personal impact of this retrenchment,
Right.
but it also raises these kind of systemic questions about
Yeah.
procedural fairness and potential conflicts of interest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So right from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
Sandy noticed some irregularities in how the Ministry of Labor was handling their case.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is that he couldn't pinpoint like specific individuals who were responsible,
Right.
but the inconsistencies were there from the get-go.
Yeah. And these early irregularities are crucial because they set the stage for this pattern of delays and questionable actions that continue throughout the whole process. It's like a domino effect
Yeah.
that casts doubt on the entire system.
And that doubt just intensifies as the case goes on.
Right.
So in 2015, the Special Tribunal, which
Mhm.
is the body responsible for like adjudicating labor disputes,
Mm-hmm.
they hold their first hearing.
Okay.
But instead of issuing a ruling,
Mm.
the chairman orders discussions between the EPA and the bank involved in the retrenchment, and they schedule a follow-up in 2 weeks.
Interesting. So that seems reasonable at first glance, right?
Right.
It makes sense to encourage a dialogue.
Yeah,
Maybe they can reach some kind of amicable resolution.
exactly.
But here's the thing that promised follow-up meeting.
Yeah,
It never happened.
never happened.
And what followed was this frustrating period of silence and just inaction.
Right.
And this stretches all the way to 2016.
I can only imagine how disheartening
Oh, yeah.
that must have been for the officers, you know?
Absolutely.
They're in limbo,
Yeah.
facing financial strain, uncertainty,
Right.
while the wheels of justice are just like
Yeah.
barely turning.
Grinding away.
Yeah. And all this time, they're relying on the EPA and their industrial relations officer, Harrison Thompson,
Yeah.
for guidance and representation.
And for those who might not be familiar, an industrial relations officer, they act as a liaison between the union, the employees, and the legal team.
Got it.
So they play a critical role in navigating labor disputes
Yeah.
and making sure that workers' rights are actually protected.
So Thompson is supposed to be their champion,
Exactly.
right? Like their guide through this legal maze.
Right.
But as we're going to find out, his actions, or rather his inaction,
Ooh.
raise some serious red flags.
So this period of prolonged silence ultimately ends with the case being abruptly dismissed in 2016.
Wow.
And there's no clear explanation.
Just dismissed.
Yeah, you can imagine the shock and frustration
Yeah.
that this caused for the officers who were left with no answers
Right.
and just this profound sense of injustice.
That's like they got hit with a curveball.
Absolutely.
Totally blindsided.
Yeah.
Especially because Thompson had this reputation for winning these types of cases.
Mm-hmm.
So this dismissal prompts them to start seeking legal advice outside of the EPA.
Okay.
And they start exploring the possibility of an appeal.
So this is a proactive step.
Yeah.
Really speaks volumes about their determination to fight for a fair resolution.
Exactly.
But it's during this critical phase that communication with the EPA and Thompson really starts to break down.
Right.
The officers are left in the dark about the appeal process, the costs involved,
Right.
and the overall strategy.
This lack of transparency is just perplexing.
It is.
You would think they would be kept informed every step of the way.
Absolutely.
And this is where things get even more complicated.
Okay.
So filing an appeal typically involves a fee, right?
Right.
But when Sandy inquired about this, he was informed that Thompson had a contingency fee arrangement
Okay.
with the law firm handling the appeal.
Now, a contingency fee arrangement essentially means that the law firm only gets paid if they win the case.
Right.
They take a percentage of the settlement as their fee,
Okay.
which is legal. But the fact that Thompson had this personal connection with the law firm, they were supposedly friends, raises concerns about potential conflicts of interest.
Right. You start to wonder if this arrangement was truly in the best interests of the officers.
Exactly.
Or more about like personal favors
Right.
and connections.
Yeah.
And this just fuels Sandy's suspicions.
Yeah.
And prompts him to dig even deeper into the EPA's handling of the case.
It's a crucial turning point in the story.
Right.
Sandy's initial trust in the system
Yeah.
starts to just erode.
Yeah.
And it's replaced by this growing sense of unease and suspicion.
Right.
And that's what drives him to just relentlessly seek answers
Exactly.
and hold those in power accountable.
So we've got this situation where these officers are dealing with the emotional and financial strain of being retrenched.
Right.
They're kept in the dark about these crucial legal proceedings.
Yeah.
And now there's this like shadow of doubt cast over the very people who are supposed to be their advocates.
Yeah. It's a recipe for disillusionment and distrust.
Exactly. And that distrust
Yeah.
sets the stage for an even more
Oh.
complex and dramatic chapter in this whole saga.
Okay.
As we'll see in part 2,
Yeah.
the appeal process unfolds
Yeah.
with its own set of twists and turns.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear
Yeah.
what happens next.
Yeah. It's a wild ride.
Okay.
So buckle up.
All right. Welcome back to our deep dive into this estate police officer's retrenchment case.
Yeah. It's been a wild ride so far.
It really has. And as we uncovered in part 1, the path to justice has been anything but straightforward.
Right.
Riddled with procedural inconsistencies and that growing sense of distrust towards the people who are supposed to be representing the officers.
Yeah. And it's a story that really makes you think about accountability and transparency
Absolutely.
and the effectiveness of these systems that are meant to protect workers' rights.
Exactly.
And if you remember, we left off with the officers feeling incredibly disillusioned after their case was kind of just abruptly dismissed by the special tribunal.
Wow.
And so they started exploring the possibility of an appeal.
Okay, so this appeal process, though,
Yeah.
it just adds another layer of complexity and frustration to their whole ordeal.
Right.
So instead of receiving, clear communication and guidance
Right.
from their union, the EPA,
Yeah.
and their industrial relations officer, Harrison Thompson,
Uh-huh.
they're largely left in the dark.
It's almost like the people who should have been advocating for them the most were actually the ones adding to confusion and stress.
Exactly. And this lack of transparency just fuels that growing sense of suspicion.
Right.
Remember Sandy's discovery about the contingency fee arrangement?
Oh, yeah, between
Yeah.
Thompson and the law firm
Yeah.
handling the appeal.
Right. So that raises those concerns about potential conflicts of interest
Yeah.
and whether the officer's best interests were truly being prioritized.
It's like a classic David versus Goliath situation. You have these officers who are already feeling vulnerable and uncertain,
Yeah.
trying to navigate this complex legal system.
Right.
And then they're hit with this lack of support and transparency.
Right. From the very people they're relying on. It's
Exactly.
just a recipe for frustration and disillusionment.
And it brings up a really important point about legal ethics.
Yeah.
This duty of loyalty.
Absolutely.
Lawyers and representatives, they're ethically bound to act in the best interests of their client.
Right.
And avoid any conflicts of interest that could compromise their representation.
Right.
So even if that contingency fee arrangement was technically legal,
Yeah.
the optics of it, especially given Thompson's personal relationship with the law firm,
Right.
it just raises those ethical questions.
Yeah, it casts a shadow of doubt over the entire process.
And that doubt lingers as the appeal process drags on, adding to the emotional and financial strain that these officers are already experiencing.
They've been dealing with this since 2014.
I know, it's 2021 now.
7 years.
7 years later, and they're still fighting for a resolution.
It's incredible.
It speaks to their perseverance.
It really does.
They could have given up,
Absolutely.
but they choose to keep pushing,
Yeah.
demanding answers and a fair hearing.
Good for them.
And this brings us to a rather perplexing turn of events.
Okay.
In 2021, the appeal court delivers its ruling.
All right.
But the EPA's response is not what you would expect.
Oh, really? How so?
So instead of celebrating a victory for their members,
Uh-huh.
the EPA releases this self-congratulatory statement on Facebook.
What?
Highlighting a minor procedural win.
Okay.
But completely overlooking the core issue of the officer's retrenchment.
So it's like they're trying to spin the narrative, focusing on this technicality while downplaying the fact that their members are still out of work, still seeking justice for what they believe was an unfair dismissal.
Exactly. And Sandy, always the tenacious investigator, he was not having it.
Good for him.
So he confronts Ramatar, who's one of the retrenched officers who's more closely involved with the EPA.
Got it.
Demanding an explanation for this, seemingly disingenuous victory declaration.
So this confrontation is really significant because it highlights that growing divide between the officers and their supposed representatives.
Right.
Sandy's questioning reveals this deep-seated frustration with the EPA's lack of transparency and their seemingly misplaced priorities.
Exactly. And what's even more perplexing is when Sandy inquires about the next steps in the legal process.
Okay.
Specifically, whether the special tribunal has appealed the decision to the Privy Council. He's met with silence.
Wow. So neither the EPA nor Harrison Thompson could provide any documentation confirming that an appeal had even been filed.
It's just a blatant lack of transparency.
It really is.
Adds another layer of suspicion to this whole saga.
Right.
It's like they were trying to stonewall him.
Yeah, hoping he'd just give up and go away.
But as we know, Sandy's not one to back down.
He's persistent.
Yeah. So faced with this lack of cooperation, Sandy takes matters into his own hands.
Okay.
In 2021, he writes directly to the appeal court.
Wow.
Requesting official documentation to confirm whether the special tribunal had actually followed the proper procedures for appealing to the Privy Council.
So he's essentially bypassing the EPA and Thompson at this point, going straight to a higher authority.
Exactly.
To get some clarity.
Yeah. But it takes 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Of emails, phone calls, relentless follow-ups.
That's dedication.
Before he finally gets a response in 2024.
And what do they say?
The answer.
Yeah.
The case was finalized in the appeal court.
Oh, wow.
But just when it seems like this whole thing might be coming to a close, a new twist emerges.
Of course.
2 months later, a tribunal hearing is scheduled.
Okay.
Followed by the long-awaited Privy Council ruling.
The suspense must have been incredible.
I know this all stems from that initial retrenchment back in 2014.
Right.
And now it's 2024.
A
decade of legal battles and uncertainty.
Wow.
So what did the Privy Council decide?
So the Privy Council's judgment is a pivotal moment in this case.
Okay.
They were highly critical of the special tribunal's conduct, citing a lack of impartiality and neutrality.
Wow.
They even questioned why the bank, the other party in the dispute, hadn't even participated in the proceedings.
It's like a total indictment of the system that was supposed to be delivering justice.
Yeah, and it validates all of Sandy's suspicions all along.
Right. Something wasn't right.
Exactly. Procedures weren't followed.
Yeah.
And these officers were denied a fair hearing.
So ultimately, the Privy Council's ruling, it's a resounding victory for the retrenched officers.
It is.
But it's also a stark reminder of the flaws within the legal system.
Right.
And the challenges that individuals face when they're trying to seek justice.
Especially when they're up against these powerful institutions.
Exactly. And while the Privy Council's decision mandates a new hearing before a fresh panel at the industrial court.
Good.
It also highlights the need for some broader reforms.
Right.
To ensure greater transparency.
Absolutely.
Accountability and access to justice for everyone.
It's a crucial takeaway from this whole story.
Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, we've been going pretty deep on this state police officer's retrenchment case.
Yeah, it's a long and winding road.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's become clear that this story is about so much more than just this one group of officers.
Absolutely.
You know, it brings up these broader questions about worker rights, the role of unions, and the accessibility of justice itself.
It's a microcosm, you know, of the challenges that so many individuals face when they're trying to navigate these legal systems, especially when they're up against institutions that have way more power and resources.
And speaking of institutions, we got to talk about the State Police Association, the EPA.
Yeah.
Their actions, or sometimes inaction, I should say, throughout this case, have been, well, perplexing, to say the least.
Perplexing is a good word for it.
I mean, their conduct raises some serious concerns about union effectiveness.
Absolutely.
And their responsibility to actually advocate for their members.
You know, the lack of communication.
Right.
The questionable decision-making.
That Facebook post.
Oh, yeah, the Facebook post.
Celebrating a hollow victory.
It just paints this picture of an organization that seems more concerned with public perception than actually representing the needs of their members.
It really makes you think, what can be done to ensure that unions are truly serving the people they represent?
That's the million-dollar question.
Is it stronger internal controls, more transparent communication, or even a change in leadership?
I think those are all valid points.
It's a wake-up call for unions across the board.
Yeah, across various sectors.
You know, highlighting the need for greater accountability, transparency.
Absolutely.
And a genuine commitment to fighting for workers' rights, not just engaging in, performative advocacy.
Right. It has to be more than just words.
Actions speak louder than words. And it brings up a point that's relevant, I think, for everyone.
Yeah.
Whether you're in a union or not. How do we as individuals hold these large organizations accountable?
Right. How do we make sure they're actually doing what they're supposed to?
Is it through active participation, vocal dissent, or even seeking external oversight?
Those are all good options. I think silence and complacency can often just perpetuate the status quo.
Right.
Even when that status quo is failing to serve the people it's supposed to protect.
Exactly. So speaking up, demanding transparency, participating in the processes that govern these institutions.
Right, using your voice.
It can actually drive positive change.
It can make a difference.
Absolutely. And beyond the role of unions, this case also really shines a light on this issue of access to justice.
Which is a huge issue.
I mean, navigating legal procedures can be daunting for anyone.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's especially challenging for folks who are facing financial hardship, who might be unfamiliar with the complexities of the system, or who are up against these really powerful entities.
They don't have the resources to fight back.
Exactly. And think about these officers in this case.
Yeah.
They're already dealing with the emotional and financial burden of being retrenched.
Right.
And then they have to navigate this convoluted legal process.
Or so overwhelmed.
Often feeling lost and completely unsupported.
And it highlights how these systemic barriers can really disproportionately impact those who are already vulnerable.
And it begs the question, what can be done to actually level the playing field?
Right. How do we make the system fairer for everyone?
Are there ways to simplify legal procedures?
Yeah.
Provide more affordable legal assistance, or even create mechanisms for faster resolution of these disputes?
Especially in employment cases.
Exactly.
Where timely outcomes are so crucial.
So crucial. So those are some really big questions that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. We need to find solutions that actually work.
And amidst all the complexity and frustration of this case, Victor Sandy's determination really stands out.
He is an inspiration.
You know, he meticulously documented every inconsistency, challenged those in power, refused to be silenced or intimidated.
A true advocate for himself and his colleagues.
His story is a testament to the impact that a single individual can have.
One person can make a difference.
It's a reminder that even when you're up against these seemingly insurmountable obstacles,
right, it can feel impossible.
Persistence, meticulous documentation, and a commitment to truth can actually make a difference.
It's about not giving up.
He didn't just accept things as they were.
Right, he took action.
He pushed back, demanded answers, and ultimately contributed to this significant legal victory.
Which could have a ripple effect.
Exactly.
And benefit others facing similar situations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the question that I think we're all left with is, what role can each of us play in ensuring that the systems that are supposed to protect our rights are actually serving their purpose?
It's a call to action for all of us.
To stay informed.
To stay engaged.
About our rights to support organizations that are advocating for workers.
Absolutely.
And to speak up when we see injustice happening.
Our voices matter.
We all have a part to play.
We do.
In building a more just and equitable society.
It's an ongoing effort.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Into this story that really reveals, I think, the complexities of workplace justice.
Yeah.
The power of individual action and the ongoing need for reform and accountability.
We've got to keep pushing for a better system.
Within our systems. So let's keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for a future where justice is truly accessible to all.
Couldn't have said it better myself.